It is the spring of 1944, and somewhere along the chalky coastline of southeast England, a German reconnaissance aircraft banks silently through broken cloud. The pilot adjusts his course and squints through his viewfinder. Below him, stretching across the flat farmland of Kent and Essex, lies the most fearsome invasion force ever assembled on British soil. Hundreds of tanks sit in organized rows, their hulls dull and battle-ready. Landing craft crowd the estuaries. Fuel depots glitter in the pale morning light. Supply lorries line the roads in disciplined columns, and the radio waves hum with the constant chatter of officers, logistics staff, and command signals crackling across the ether. The pilot completes his run, banks north, and turns for home. His photographs, developed within hours at a Luftwaffe intelligence facility, will show the same thing that dozens of previous sorties have confirmed. A vast Allied army, poised and ready, preparing to strike across the narrowest point of the English Channel directly towards the Pas de Calais, the obvious, logical, overwhelming choice for the greatest amphibious assault in history. There is only one problem with everything that German pilot has seen. None of it exists. The tanks are rubber and canvas, inflated like balloons and painted to cast the right shadows. The landing craft are made of scaffolding and plywood. The fuel depots are empty shells. The radio traffic is a carefully scripted fiction, broadcast by a small team of operators following a script designed to mimic an entire army group. Even the tire tracks pressed into the soft English earth have been made deliberately, by vehicles driving in patterns calculated to suggest enormous troop movements. What that pilot has photographed is a ghost, a masterpiece of strategic theater so elaborate, so meticulously constructed, and so ruthlessly maintained that it helped change the course of the Second World War. Not with a single bullet fired, not with a tank or a warship or a bomb, but with the most powerful weapon of all. A lie, perfectly told. This is the story of the 1st United States Army Group, a force of over 1 million men that never existed, and the audacious operation that kept Adolf Hitler's gaze fixed on the wrong beach for long enough to decide the fate of Europe. By the summer of 1943, British and American planners faced a problem so vast it bordered on the absurd. The invasion of Nazi-occupied Western Europe, codenamed Operation Overlord, had to happen. The entire Allied strategy depended on it. The Soviet Union was bearing the catastrophic weight of the war on the Eastern Front, and without a second front in the West, the prospect of total victory remained distant at best. But getting hundreds of thousands of men across the English Channel, onto a defended coastline, and into fighting order before the German military could organize a crushing response, that was a puzzle that had kept the brightest military minds awake for years. The fundamental difficulty was arithmetic. Germany had approximately 58 divisions stationed in France and the Low Countries, many of them among the finest units in the Wehrmacht. The Atlantic Wall, that immense fortified coastal defense stretching from Norway to Spain, was not impregnable, but it was formidable. And at its strongest points, particularly along the Pas de Calais, it represented a killing ground of genuine horror. Allied planners estimated that a frontal assault against a fully alerted, fully reinforced German defensive line stood almost no chance of succeeding. The mathematics of attritional beach warfare were simply too brutal. The chosen landing zone, Normandy, offered better conditions. Longer beaches, less immediate fortification, and the possibility of tactical surprise. But Normandy only worked if the Germans believed the real blow was coming somewhere else, and believed it not merely before the landing, but after it, while the lodgment was still fragile and every German panzer division held in reserve represented the difference between success and catastrophe. Previous Allied deception operations had produced mixed results. Operation Torch, the North Africa landings of 1942, had used misdirection with some success, but the scale required for Overlord was of an entirely different order. This time, the deception would need to convince Hitler himself that Normandy was a feint, and that the real invasion was still coming, aimed at Calais. long after the real invasion had already begun. It was, by any measure, one of the most demanding intelligence and theatrical challenges in military history. The organization tasked with solving it was a small, eccentric, and extraordinarily brilliant group of people working under the umbrella of the London Controlling Section, in concert with MI5 and the broader machinery of British intelligence. Their plan was called Operation Bodyguard. Its centerpiece, the deception aimed directly at the Normandy landings, was given a simpler name: Operation Quicksilver. The core of Quicksilver was a fiction of almost breathtaking ambition. The Allies would invent an entire army group from nothing, complete with commander, divisional structure, order of battle, radio traffic, physical presence, and corroborating intelligence from agents that the Germans trusted absolutely. This phantom formation, the First United States Army Group, or FUSAG, would be stationed in southeast England, directly across from the Pas de Calais, and it would appear to represent the most powerful Allied striking force ever assembled. The physical construction of FUSAG's apparent presence fell to a small number of specialist units: inflatable tanks, remarkable objects, constructed from rubberized canvas and designed by the British theatrical and engineering industries, were produced in considerable numbers and positioned across farmland visible to German aerial reconnaissance. When deflated, a single man could carry one under his arm. When inflated with a simple pump, it stood roughly 4 meters tall, cast a convincing shadow in aerial photography, and could be arranged in the kind of dispersed but visible formations that a trained intelligence analyst would expect from a genuine armored unit. Landing craft, constructed from scaffolding poles covered in painted wood and canvas, were moored in the estuaries of the Thames and the rivers of Kent. Seen from 3,000 meters through a camera lens, they were indistinguishable from the real thing. But physical props alone were insufficient. The Germans were sophisticated. They cross-referenced aerial photography with signals intelligence, with agent reports, and with traffic analysis. The practice of monitoring the volume and pattern of radio communications to infer military activity, even when the content of those communications was encrypted. A real army generated a particular kind of radio noise, a constant background hum of logistical signals, command traffic, weather reports, and administrative chatter that had a distinctive rhythm and volume. FUSAG had to generate exactly that noise. The wireless deception component of Quicksilver employed hundreds of operators broadcasting carefully scripted traffic across frequencies the Germans were known to monitor. The scripts were written by intelligence officers who understood precisely what a formation of FUSAG's supposed size would be communicating, and at what volume in the weeks before a major operation. Operators played multiple roles, sometimes impersonating entire divisional headquarters with a handful of transmitters. The signals were broadcast from locations consistent with where FUSAG's units were supposed to be stationed, adding another layer of geographical plausibility to the illusion. The manufacturing of the physical deception assets took place across a number of facilities, including factories in the English Midlands that had previously been used for theatrical and film production, an appropriate heritage. Exact production numbers remain partially classified, though estimates suggest that several hundred inflatable vehicles and structures were produced in total, alongside a significant number of the wooden and canvas landing craft. The operation required the coordination of engineers, set designers, radio operators, intelligence officers, and a small army of laborers who were told only as much as they needed to know. Perhaps the most crucial single element of the entire deception, however, was not rubber or canvas or radio waves. It was a man. General George S. Patton was the most feared American combat commander in the German military's estimation. Aggressive, brilliant, and associated with the kind of fast-moving armored warfare that the Wehrmacht both practiced and respected. When the Allies placed Patton in nominal command of FUSAG, German intelligence analysts drew the obvious conclusion: The most powerful Allied army group, commanded by America's most dangerous general, was waiting in southeast England for the moment to strike. The assignment of Patton to FUSAG was itself a piece of casting so perfect that it required no further embellishment. His presence gave the fiction a credibility that no amount of rubber tanks or radio traffic could have manufactured alone. Patton played the role with characteristic flair, making public appearances in the Kent area, attending carefully staged social events, and allowing himself to be seen in ways that reinforced the German assumption without technically violating the secrecy of the operation. Every public sighting of Patton in southeast England was another piece of evidence that German intelligence filed under confirmation of FUSAG. If you are finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. Underpinning all of this was the most remarkable intelligence asset of the entire war, the double-cross system. By 1944, Amiens 5 had achieved something almost without precedent in the history of espionage. Every single German agent operating in Britain had either been captured, turned, or was under British control. The network of double agents, run by the 20 Committee, so named because the Roman numerals XX formed a double cross, fed the Germans a carefully constructed diet of accurate information designed to establish credibility, mixed with the specific fictions that Operation Quicksilver required. Agents including Juan Pujol Garcia, known to the British as Garbo, and to the Germans as Arabelle, sent messages to Berlin that directly confirmed the existence of FUSAG and its Pas-de-Calais intentions. The Germans trusted these agents implicitly. They had no reason not to. The information had always checked out before. On June 6, 1944, the real invasion began. Nearly 160,000 Allied troops crossed the Channel in the largest amphibious operation in history, landing on 5 beaches along the Normandy coast in conditions that were difficult enough to have brought the entire enterprise to the edge of failure, even without German intervention. The fighting was fierce, the losses significant, and the lodgment painfully narrow in the days that followed. But Hitler hesitated. The 15th Army, the formation responsible for defending the Pas-de-Calais, was not released to reinforce Normandy. German commanders argued amongst themselves. Some believed the Normandy landings were the main effort. Others, including Hitler, remained convinced that FUSAG was still poised across the water, that the real blow had not yet fallen, and that stripping the Calais defenses would be catastrophic folly. Agent Garbo sent a message to Berlin on the night of June 9th, 3 days after D-Day, which German intelligence passed immediately to the highest levels of command. It stated, with apparent urgency, that the Normandy landings were a diversion, that Patton's army remained in England, that the true invasion was imminent, and that to commit the reserves to Normandy now would be a catastrophic error. The message was so convincing that Hitler, who had briefly released 2 panzer divisions to reinforce Normandy, reversed the order. The divisions stopped. The reserves stayed north. In the weeks that followed, as the Allied lodgment in Normandy gradually solidified and expanded, the Germans continued to watch the southeast of England with anxious eyes. The Phantom Army that had never existed held the 15th Army in place long enough for the real army to achieve the operational depth it needed to survive. The precise period for which the deception remained effective is debated. Estimates range from several weeks to nearly 2 months, but the consensus among historians is clear. The deception bought time, and that time was decisive. The records of the German 15th Army's movements during this period document the paralysis in frustrating detail. Divisions that could have reached Normandy within 48 hours of D-Day sat in their positions near Calais for weeks, waiting for an attack that was never coming, guarding against a ghost. Germany had its own deception operations and its own understanding of the strategic value of misdirection, but the Wehrmacht's equivalent programs never achieved the systematic, sustained effectiveness of Quicksilver. German deception efforts on the Western Front were hampered by the fundamental disadvantage that Britain's double-cross system had created. The absence of any reliable human intelligence from inside Britain meant that German planners had no way to cross-check or verify what they were being told. Every piece of intelligence about Allied dispositions came either from aerial photography, which showed exactly what the British and Americans wanted it to show, or from agents whose reports were unknown to Berlin, being written in London. The American contribution to the broader Allied deception effort included the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, a unit sometimes called the Ghost Army, which operated in continental Europe using similar theatrical techniques to mask real unit movements and simulate phantom formations. Their work was excellent, but it operated at a tactical rather than a strategic level. The theater-wide, campaign-shaping deception that fixed the 15th Army in place was specifically a product of the British intelligence system and its extraordinary penetration of German espionage. The Germans never came close to replicating the double-cross system's central achievement, the total ownership of an adversary's intelligence network. Without that foundation, no amount of rubber tanks or scripted radio traffic could have been nearly as effective. Assessing the true impact of Operation Quicksilver requires a certain intellectual honesty about what we can and cannot know. Historians have debated for decades precisely how much difference the deception made, whether Hitler would have committed the 15th Army to Normandy regardless, whether the terrain and logistics alone would have delayed a German response sufficiently, and whether the eventual Allied breakout in late July and August was truly shaped by the Phantom Army's existence. What the documents show is this: the German 15th Army remained north of the Seine for weeks after D-Day. 2 panzer divisions were halted on Hitler's direct order after Garbo's message. The German High Command debated the Calais threat in terms that demonstrate genuine belief in FUSAG's existence, and the Allied lodgment in Normandy survived its most vulnerable period, the first 6 to 8 weeks, without facing the full weight of German armor that was, in theory, available to crush it. The psychological impact on German decision-making cannot be quantified but was clearly significant. Uncertainty is its own weapon. An enemy that might be wrong, an army that might still be coming, a plan that might be a feint. These possibilities are paralyzing in a way that a straightforward military threat is not. FUSAG did not merely absorb German attention. It colonized German imagination. The legacy of the operation shaped post-war thinking about strategic deception in ways that remain relevant today. The principle that an enemy can be defeated not merely by destroying his forces, but by corrupting the information on which those forces act has become foundational to modern military doctrine. The specific techniques pioneered during Quicksilver, systematic double-agent management, coordinated signals deception, physical simulation, and the use of a trusted and famous figure as a symbolic anchor, have all reappeared in subsequent conflicts, adapted but fundamentally unchanged. Several of the inflatable tanks and landing craft used during the operation survive in museum collections. The Imperial War Museum holds examples of the equipment used, and the story of the double-cross agents has been extensively documented, including in the memoirs of some of the participants. Juan Pujol Garcia, Garbo himself, received the MBE from the British government and, remarkably, the Iron Cross from the German government, the only man in history to be decorated by both sides of the same war. He was, in the most profound sense, exactly what both sides thought he was. Return for a moment to that German pilot, banking through the spring cloud above southeast England. Consider what he sees below him and what it means to him. He is a professional, trained to interpret what his photographs will show. He sees tanks and landing craft and supply depots and the unmistakable signature of an army preparing to move. He flies home and reports what he has found, and that report travels up through the layers of German intelligence and into the briefings that reach the men who will decide where to send the panzer divisions when the time comes. He has seen everything and understood nothing, because what he has seen was not a thing at all. It was a thought a thought carefully constructed in the minds of a small group of British intelligence officers and fed, with exquisite precision, into the one place it needed to be, the imagination of the enemy. The 1st United States Army Group never fired a shot. It never had a shot to fire. It had no soldiers, no armor, no fuel, no ammunition, no officers, no mess halls or field hospitals or chaplains or maintenance crews. It had no wounded and no dead. It existed in the Luftwaffe's photography, in the German signals logs, in the reports of agents who were working for the other side, and in Adolf Hitler's certainty that the blow he was waiting for was still to come. By the time the Germans fully understood that FUSAG was not real, that there would be no second invasion, that the 15th Army had been held in the wrong place by a lie, the Allies had broken out of Normandy, liberated Paris, and begun the advance that would end the war. 1 million phantom soldiers, and not one of them fired a single round. But they may well have won the war,